All right, so why did I decide to build a subwoofer array like this? Why did I decide to build this line array like this? And why did I only put it on one side? That's what I'm going to talk about today. Some of the choices that I made for this show, some of the mistakes that I made on this subwoofer array design. And then we're just going to walk through the process of building a horizontal subwoofer array together. And hopefully you'll learn some things, and hopefully you'll have some suggestions for me as well. So before we get started, I want to let you know I have a free workshop happening on Saturday at 9 a.m. If you're in Minneapolis, it will be here in person at the AV4U studios. And if you're not, there is a link to join a Zoom meeting. So that's Sunday, July 14th at 9 a.m. We're going to be talking subwoofer alignment. We're going to be practicing with real speakers. So the reason that this workshop is 4 hours instead of a normal like 60 minutes is because we're going to do a lot of demos and we're going to take a lot of time to just practice. So hopefully there'd be very little of me talking and mostly like you actually practicing with subaligner, with our ears, with the audio analyzer, all that stuff. So some questions we're going to answer. Which DSP setting should I choose? What are the biggest mistakes to avoid? And how do I verify that it's working? And I'm going to give everybody a free copy of my new edition, the second edition to the complete guide to measurement microphone placement for subwoofer alignment. Okay, so let's talk about this show. So I was in Bentonville, Arkansas. We were in this parking lot, and I basically had a narrow range to cover. So this will explain some of this right away. So here is this area where it says yard games. This is the area we pretty much need to cover. And in general, they told me they wanted to stay out of this area because this is where people are ordering food, and they could potentially be a lot of people that are English as a second language. And so like they wanted to keep sound off this area. Here's the stage, obviously. And then I think they also kind of wanted to leave this area without too much sound. Number one, because there's a big canopy covering it anyway, so it'd be hard to get sound in there. And number two, because people are in there talking. So really, this was the main area to cover, right? This strip. So hopefully right away that sort of explains to you why I went with one big long line array instead of two, because I just have this one strip to cover. Like, I'm not going to put a line array over here and cover this area where there's no people, or over here where there's no people, because we want to avoid that area. So instead, one big one. And if I had two, I would have had to sort of cross them like across each other, and that still just makes it too wide. So that's why I went with the single line array. Now let's talk about the subwoofer array. I was excited to get a chance to try a horizontal array again. I hadn't done it in a while. I almost always go with a gradient array for various reasons that I think I've discussed in other videos. But with this one, I thought a horizontal array would be helpful. With your cardioid arrays, you know, you're sort of limited, in my experience. There are some different variations, but with your gradient arrays, like I like to use, you're sort of limited in how narrow you can get. But with your horizontal arrays, you have a huge amount of flexibility with the coverage shape, right? Now there are some other drawbacks, but this is what I was initially thinking. Let's try a horizontal array. Let's see if I can just cover this strip. Won't that be cool? Ultimately, this became a problem, but I'll actually, let's just talk about that now. So long story short, I'll tell you where we're heading with this, is that I was able to hit this target coverage shape with my subwoofer array, but of course my main array isn't this narrow. It's a 100-degree array, and so let me just right away give you an example of what that might look like. So here in MapXT, oh, I guess I deleted it. So let me just put in a 100-degree speaker. So if you insert an individual speaker and you go all the way to the bottom under the discontinued products, then you can find a melody. Where is it? Legacy products, right? And I don't know why it's rotated like that. So I put that in, and if we just hit predict real quick at 4K, then you can get a sense of what a 100-degree speaker might look like against this coverage shape that you see defined here by this rectangle. So if you look all the way here at the end at 200 feet, and then you look at this color of blue, and you head out this direction, it's covering way past these lines, right? So if you imagine that this is the shape here that I'm trying to hit, we can see that this color goes all the way out here. And now keep in mind that I ended up having to put front of house over, I can't remember exactly the depth, but I think it was like over here somewhere. So I'm still pretty much in the coverage of the mains here, right? Not so with the subwoofer array. So I thought this subwoofer array was such a cool idea, and it did end up working out, and I'll just give you a quick demo of that. So let's go down to 63 Hertz. So this was really cool because I was able to not only hit this shape, but also just experimented with turning around two of these subwoofers and making it gradient array, you know, in landscape mode. And I thought it worked pretty well because the stage ended up being right over here. And so a big portion of the stage here ends up being in this cancellation area. So that was great, but the shape was so nicely fit that then when I was over here at front of house, I couldn't hear the subs at all. And right now we're just looking at 63 Hertz. So you can imagine as we go up in frequency, it's going to get even more narrow. And so it ended up being a really tough day for me in terms of mixing because I couldn't hear the subs at all. So it sounded totally different if I would walk over here into the coverage area. It sounded really good. It was really nice. And I did have an iPad and I would do that occasionally, but the rest of the day standing over here, I just had to know like it didn't sound quite right. So the moral of the story is that yes, I was able to hit my coverage area here with this particular loudspeaker array, this sub array, but it didn't match the rest of the system. And subwoofers don't exist in a vacuum, right? They have to connect with the rest of the system. And so, you know, as we saw earlier, my main speaker array was covering, you know, farther out to here. And so over in this region, you know, the whole system starts to fall apart because we're not covering both the subs and the mains, you know, in the same width. Okay, so that was probably the biggest, most obvious thing that sort of went wrong for me that day. But let's walk through how to design the subwoofer array and you'll see where I did some other things wrong. So let's open up Merlin Van Veen's subwoofer array designer. If you guys don't have this already, you should have it. You can download it from his website for free, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I'll put a link below this video. Okay, so I'm going to go through this how I did it the first way, and then we'll go through it again sort of the way Merlin recommends in his guide. So pretty simple, you just fill out all of the yellow boxes starting at the left and moving to the right. So we're going to do a delayed horizontal array. Remember, this is not a physical arc. I just have a line here of speakers. And this is the spacing that I ended up with. I've got 6 speakers here. And I put in the temperature. And then the next thing I wanted to put in the angle I want to cover. So how did I figure this out? Well, forward aspect ratio is a function of depth over width, right? So my depth is 200 feet and my width is 66 feet. So I need to hit a forward aspect ratio of 3. So how do I convert that to this angle here? Well, there's a handful of different ways you could do it, but for me, one of the fastest ways to do it is to open up the Aiming Triangles business card, which I will also put a link to below this video. But if you just Google Aiming Triangles business card, you'll probably come up with it, or search Sound Design Live for it. Anyway, if you put in your email address, it'll allow you to download this and you could actually print it out, make your own little card. I carry one of these around with me all the time just because it has some helpful values here. because we see that a forward aspect ratio of 3 is a coverage angle of 40, which is why I put 20 in here, because I get this number 40. So 20 is half of it, right? So 20 is this mic angle here, so that's half. So if I want the whole coverage angle here of 40 degrees, then I need to put in 20 here to get 40. And then for me, the next step is just adjusting these spacing distances here until the opening angle here matches my target, which is 20 degrees. I'm sorry, 40 degrees. So you can see my opening angles here are close to 40 degrees in the middle. So this is another decision I had to make here that where I think things kind of went wrong. I posted this question on Facebook and I was asking people, hey, when you're designing a horizontal array like this, do you try to hit the coverage angle in the center of the operating range or at the top of the operating range? And I didn't really get a solid answer from anyone, but I decided to try it this way because I've always done the top of the operating range and I think that's the way you are supposed to do it. I decided to try the center and I think that was probably not the best choice because of this problem that I talked about earlier where you can see over here in the polar plot actually. So as frequency goes higher, coverage gets more and more narrow. And then in this area up here around 100 Hertz where we have a lot of interaction between main and sub, their coverage shapes don't match at all anymore. Or they're too different basically. As you walk from left to right, they change a lot and therefore the tonality changes a lot and that's not what we want, right? We want consistency. So let me just finish up talking about how I did this initially. So I'm looking at this relative mic arc number. I'm looking at this tiny number here. And I'm basically adjusting the spacing until I can get this number here as close to 0 as possible. So I usually try to figure out a frequency I want to focus on and then try to hit 0 there. So I'll come back to that in a second. Let me just show you. Here's the subwoofer, KS118. And I look at the frequency response here. And I know this isn't the whole story, but this is, I think a good place to start. Why isn't this the whole story? Well, what's going to happen later when I turn this subwoofer up, right? So if I turn the subwoofer up 6 dB like this relative to the main and create like this haystacking effect, this is the plot in subliner, by the way. This is not the same subwoofer, but it's similar. So this is just illustrating a story here that if you turn the subwoofer up, of course, then relative to the main, more of these high frequencies will be exposed. So although the operating range says, whatever it says, 100 Hertz, I'm exposing more of those here. And so we're still going to be hearing these. These are only 6 dB down in relationship to the main. So this is another thing to consider when doing these designs. How much are you going to turn up the subs when you actually get into the field? And therefore, do you need to consider higher frequencies in that subwoofer array? Okay, so I need to zoom back out so we can see everything here. Now, I'll just give you a quick demo. Like, let's say that this started at 1 meter. And then down here, I can see that 63 Hertz says it's too wide relative to the mic arc, 50%, positive number. So I start going up. 1.1, I'm still looking at this number down here, 35%, so I'm getting closer. 1.2, 1.3, I'm getting closer. 1.4, 5%, really close now, 1.5, and I've gone over. So it's in between 1.4 and 1.5, so 1.45 is right on the money, 0%. So I've perfectly matched 63 Hertz. And so I'm thinking, great, so this is where I went with my design, and then I exported this, imported into MapXT, and I saw that it worked, and then I started experimenting with turning these subwoofers around and trying to combine an inverted gradient stack here. And this is what I deployed in the field, and I've already sort of talked about the results. So let me go back and show you how I could have done this a little bit better in Subwoofer Array Designer. So where I typically make mistakes is when I try to go too fast. Some of you may be familiar with that as well. So if I had actually opened Merlin's guide here, tutorial 5, delayed horizontal array, I would have discovered the mistakes I was making. So let's go through this together so that if you ever have to do this, maybe you'll avoid some of the same mistakes I made. Okay, so he talks about forward aspect ratio. We did that already. I know I'm going for 40 degrees, forward aspect ratio of 3. My upper bandwidth is also 100 hertz or 98. And we talked about how that's relative to how much I turn the subwoofer up later on. But let's just go with 100 hertz or 98 hertz now so I think I went with 98. Just to move along with the video here. Okay, so yep, we selected number 2, delayed horizontal array, and then adjust the parameters of spacing and arc. So this is the part that I skipped. I forgot that you could adjust the arc, because in my mind I'm thinking this is a delayed arc, so there's no physical arc, but of course when you select delayed arc in Subwoofer Array Designer and then introduce an arc, it just adjusts the delay times. It doesn't actually make a physical arc, but I forgot about that. And then adjust that until this number is 60 degrees and this number is 100. So in my case, I need to look for this number to be 40 degrees and the other one to be 98. So back over here in Subwoofer Array Designer, that's what I did. So let's start with 1 here again. You notice I'm starting with an arc of 0. And now I can zoom in more because we just have these boxes right next to each other. Okay, so I'm looking at this number, 0 degrees, and this number, 252 hertz. So let's start turning this up, 1.1. And so I see that this number doesn't change at all, so I need some arc in here, right? So 10 degrees. Okay, there's 14 degrees. What am I heading towards? I'm heading towards 40 degrees. So let's go ahead and put 40 degrees in. And there we get really close. And now let's start adjusting this some more because we want to head towards 98 degrees here. I'm going to go ahead and jump up to 2 meters and see what happens. Not always the best idea because you want to see these things change, see how they change as it progresses along. So it's actually makes more sense to go like 1.5 and then 1.6 and make sure you don't somehow jump over the target you're looking for. But I played with this already, so I'm sort of just saving us some time by jumping ahead. Okay, so we're getting closer to 98 degrees. 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. So there's 2.3, and there we go. So I've got 40 degrees and 99 degrees, almost perfect. I can see that, you know, the tonality sort of comes apart and then comes back together here at 100 hertz, right, or 98 hertz. And another interesting thing to notice here, notice that I've turned on all of the polar plots for my operating range from 41 to 98 hertz. Now they all match a lot better than they did before. So now that I'm using arc and spacing, I can get a lot better match across the operating range than I did before. So let's continue with this demo together. Let's continue with this tutorial. Okay, you should read this. I'm not going to go through that right now. So we should look at the results, right? So we go up here and we see that, yes, in fact, it's all just spacing and delay values. Delay values over here. So Merlin says if you normalize all of the microphones to number 1, you'll see that tonal variation is within intended bandwidth, falls within 6 dB. So let's try that. So over here, I've got all the microphones on and I can normalize to microphone number 1, and we see that that is in fact the case, that everything is within 6 dB, right, from 40 to 98 hertz. And now let's take a look at that polar plot again. So if we zoom over here a little bit, we can see that everything worked out pretty well. So my target here is 40 degrees, and if we look at the opening angle here, 42, 36, 32, 58, so we're under on this side of 63 and over on this side of 63. So we can see that following this method, we get, you know, the operating range kind of centered within this opening angle. And then you can export it to mapxt. I've got that open over here. And then you get something like this. So I already have a prediction here. Let's turn off these center lines for a second. So we're looking at 100 Hertz, and I'm impressed at how this is still, pretty well maintaining the shape. And if we go down in frequency, we'll see that it does a pretty good job of maintaining that shape as well. Now, I did try turning these subwoofers around and playing around with it a little bit. I didn't get very far. I think if I really wanted to make this a directional array, then I would need to double the number of subs, put 6 more subs behind here, and then I would have a gradient array with a horizontal array. Or I guess I could try to do it with 3, but the spacing would probably be too wide. So if I did the show again, I would probably just go with this subwoofer array, and I might investigate a little bit about how to make this directional, see if we could get more subwoofers. But now that I've gone back and looked at the tutorial in the guide to Subwoofer Array Designer, I kind of saw where I went wrong and how I could have had more consistency here. So thanks for joining me in this video. Please let me know if you have any ideas for me. I always like to hear, what things you might have done differently or changes you would have made. And if you can, I hope you'll join me on Sunday for this workshop. All right, thanks a lot.